What's up everyone, it's Goose, and today I did not want to get out of bed. Today we're going to do a comparison of the Archetype Gojira X and the 5150iii EL34 model in the quad Cortex. All right, so in that demo, what you heard on the left and right channels were the Gojira plugin and the 5150iii EL34 model in the quad Cortex. Joe of Gojira has mentioned that of all the 5150 models made by EVH, the model that Gojira prefers is the EL34 100 watt. So when Archetype Gojira came out, I figured the channels are based on that. And Neural DSP just announced that PCOM is coming in CorOS update 3.0, and that will have plugin support for Archetype Gojira X. And so before that comes out, I figured it'd be a good time to do a comparison of the EL34 model, which is what Gojira is using anyway, and the Gojira AMP models to really see what differences you're getting for having that plugin compatibility. Because while some people own Archetype Gojira, maybe other people don't. And I just want to see how different the AMP models were to the models in the quad Cortex, because for $130, you really want to know what you're getting in addition to what you already have on the quad Cortex. The plugin does come with other effects, which I'll talk about that later on, but the amps are definitely the draw of that plugin. So yeah, we're going to do a comparison to see how the amp models fare between the Gojira plugin and the quad Cortex. Before I move on, if you like nerding out about guitar gear like me, and also if you spend a stupid amount of time on Reverb.com, consider hitting like and subscribe. All right, so there are two 5150 EL34 models modeled in the quad Cortex. One is the blue channel and one is the red channel. The Rust amp in the Archetype Gojira will be compared with the blue channel, and the hot amp in Archetype Gojira will be compared to the red channel. Both the plugin and the amp model will be running largely the same settings. There are a few differences I did have to make, but this is to help us focus on the differences between the two models, and I'll call out the changes that I made as well so you can know exactly kind of where the dials need to be to sound like the other. I'll be running both into the Ownhammer Essentials Rectifier Oversized 412 Cab IR, and the guitar will be my Kiza Osiris with DiMarzio illuminators in the bridge, running in D standard. So let's start with the blue channel, which is a crunch channel essentially. For this one, as usual with the lower mid-gain stuff, we're going to be running just the amp and the cab without any drive in front. And the only difference that I had to make between the plugin and the amp model in terms of the settings dials was I had to turn the gain on the amp model in the quad Cortex down to 1. The plugin gain is at noon. These settings are actually derived from the preset, I think it's preset rhythm 5 in Gojira, in Archetype Gojira. And so to match that, the only thing I had to do with the amp model in the quad Cortex is just to reduce the gain a little bit. As usual, we'll start with some simple notes and chords and then get into the actual riffs. And with that out of the way, let's go. All right, so I think they sound really similar. There are some slight changes or slight differences, I mean, but in general, I feel like even though we have the gain turned down to 1 on the amp model, there's still actually just a little bit more gain. However, the voicing is super similar between the two, and so I do feel like it's still based on the blue channel or some channel of the 5150 EL34. Could potentially be a more cleaner like gain dial on the plugin itself, but there is definitely more gain on the amp model. The other thing is that I feel like even though the voicing is very similar, there's just something in the mids that I feel like is just slightly different between the two. It's not something that you could dial out with just the controls. It's just where the mids sit is just slightly different, just by a little bit. And that actually changes the feel of the amp. So I feel like the amp model in the Quad Cortex is just a slight bit more squishy, versus the amp model in the Gojira plugin is just a little bit more solid feeling when you're plucking through notes. Overall, though, I think both of these are really, really close. And Neural has mentioned in the past that a lot of the amp models in the plugins are derived from, I guess, their suite of captured amp models. And so I'm guessing this is one of those models that it's based on. All right, so moving on to high gain tones. We're actually not going to use an overdrive for this one. I usually do, but I was actually going through all the rig rundowns for Gojira, and Joe doesn't use an overdrive. At least not in live situations. I know he has a KHDK, which is Kirk Hammett's pedal company. I know he has a signature overdrive pedal with them, but in all the gear photos I've seen, the only pedals he runs are actually in the effects loop, so more like time-based effects like reverb and stuff like that, and not actually any drive going into the amps themselves. So we're going to run the EL34 and the model in the Gojira plugin without an overdrive. Once again, I took the settings from the plugin, which is preset rhythm 1, and I took that and applied that setting to the amp model in the Quad Cortex. And the only change I had to make was I just reduced the depth or resonance by about 1.5. So it's not that different, but I just reduced it because I felt like that was the only difference I was hearing. But yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get started with the comparison for the high gain. All right, so my thoughts, the Quad Cortex, as usual, has a little bit more bass. They have some bass roll off as well, but there's just a slightly elevated bass in addition to that. And I feel like turning the resonance down definitely made it closer to the plugin itself. Whereas I feel like the plugin was more kind of mix ready, which I guess is the point of it. But the distortion character between the two, however, is very, very similar. So even though the bass area is a little different, I actually feel like the distortion is so similar. In fact, when we were playing the track in the beginning, the demo that I made, both of the distortion of both of the models sounded almost identical to me. The feel is, once again, a little bit different between the two. So in the same way that the blue channel was squishier on the Quad Cortex, it's the same thing here with the red channel. It's just a slight bit more squishy. It feels bassier to play into, but when I listened back to it, just wasn't. It was pretty well matched, but it felt bassier to play through than the plugin itself. But all these differences are so minute. Like, I'm talking like less than 3% difference between the two models. And honestly, I might just be imagining those differences. All right, so what is my conclusion? Should you buy Gojira X if you already have a Quad Cortex? Maybe. I would say if you have a Quad Cortex, it's not worth buying Gojira X just for the amp models alone, because the EL34 model in here is really, really close, like probably identical, as long as you account for the idea of a plugin being more mix ready. And despite me talking about all the difference, they're just so remarkably similar once you match the IRs between the two. But if you really want the cabs in the Gojira X, the stock cabs that come with that, or if you want any of the pitch shifting effects, that becomes a little bit of a different conversation as to whether or not I feel like Gojira X is worth buying if you already have a Quad Cortex. Specifically, for $130, what you're getting in addition to what you get here is actually the whammy function and then the Gojira cabs. Because I don't believe there's a way to get a whammy effect on this unit. There is like a pitch shifter, but it doesn't work quite the same, I don't think. Maybe there is one, maybe I haven't dived into this enough to know, but the whammy pedal in the Gojira plugin does work really, really well. And a whammy pedal itself still goes for like $200, so that's still more than $130. So what you're getting is that whammy function here, although you do still have to get an expression pedal. But also, if you like the cabs, I know some people will really like the plug-in cabs that Neuro DSP has. I don't know that they match any of the cabs in here, so you'll definitely want to buy Gojira X if you plan on using those cabs in here. But $130 is still a lot, so let me know in the comments down below if you think that buying Gojira X is worth it to add on to what you already have in the Quad Cortex. And let me know how similar you think the model sounded. All right, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Later.